Alright, what's up guys? Today we're doing a very important video. We are actually discussing Super Poly. So assuming the ban list doesn't happen, this is going to be one of the strongest cards in the entire metagame. We are actually getting a new fusion deck in the next set, which is going to be the Tier Elements. And then on top of that, we also have, of course, the Fallen of Albas / Despia stuff that's already kind of in the metagame as it is. As you can see, all of the main deck all of the main deck monsters right here from all the main deck monsters for the Fallen of Albas deck are actually all Super Poly targets in some way. Mirror Jade is a Super Poly target. Fallen of Albas himself has a Super Poly like effect. Same thing with the Abyss Dragon. This card's really good. Fuses with all of your opponent's dragons. You can also just set Fallen of Albas face down, activate Super Poly, and just fuse a field full of dragons. It's just absolutely insane. But Super Poly is about to be like crazy, and the main reason is there's a new card coming out, which is the Garuga Wings of Resonant Life. This basically helps you out any board in the game because the requirements for this are so simple. It's just two monsters with same type and attribute, which is essentially every single deck in Yu-Gi-Oh, because most decks are based around a type and an attribute. So number one, it's going to be really good in the Fallen of Albas stuff. It's going to be really good in Tier Elements because Tier Elements just happens to be a deck full of super poly targets and just super polymerization and just fusion monsters in general. But as you can see here, we've got for example, this one right here, which fuses the Raino Reinhardt and two Aqua monsters. That literally, one Reinhardt and can literally out an entire Splight board, which is just insane. You could just like put a Reinhardt on board, which would be their biggest level 4 monster. That's the only water monster in the deck that's a warrior. You put that on board, you activate Super Poly, and you fuse away your opponent's totally awesome and their dupe frog. It's absolutely insane. So today we're going to be going through all of the different uses for Super Poly and all of the best Super Poly targets available in the game. In addition to that, we'll discuss like some of the other strategies to use it. You of course have Zombie World, turns everything into zombies. Zombie World will allow you to use the Nether Soul Dragon. So this just requires two zombies. You activate Zombie World, make everything zombies. Nether Soul becomes a Super Poly target, extremely good. We've also got Lair of Darkness, turns everything dark, and then it opens up a few different targets here, which would be Starving Venom and the large one that just got reprinted, which is the Preda Plant Trophilium. But you've got two targets there. Yeah, this meta is about to be crazy, just to say the least. Also, one last thing, you can actually search the... This is the only way that I think you can search Super Poly, which is the Preda Plant Chimera Flesia. If this card goes from your extra deck to the graveyard, if you can put this card into the graveyard, the following standby phase, you can add Super Poly to your hand, which is kind of crazy. You can like send it off of Dogmatica Punishment, and then you can search Super Polymerization. So it's a pretty cool synergy that you can do there. But let's get started on all of the various Super Poly targets that are available. This one's coming out, like I said, Garuga. Any two monsters, same type and attribute. This actually beats the Splight board super easily because, like I said, they make it totally awesome, and they make a dupe frog. That's their end board, and then they've got the Splight Angel. You could just Super Poly away the totally awesome and the dupe frog right off the bat, since they're both aqua water monsters. Also, this is, like I said, this is probably the best Super Poly target to ever come out because its other effect is if it is sent from field to graveyard, you get to draw a card. So for Super Poly, you typically have to discard a card, your opponent can't respond, and then you basically get to fusion summon a monster, but you go minus because you discard. But when this card leaves the field, so when you link it away or fuse with it, you actually get to draw the card that you discarded right back, which is pretty cool because you don't lose any card advantage for using Super Poly. One of the best Super Poly targets to be coming out. Definitely try to pick this up if you can. Next, we've got Preda Plant, basically I call it the Preda Plant Ultimate Dragon. This card's another really good one. 3 dark monsters. Tier Elements is a dark base deck that makes it basically makes like Dracus Depolia, and it makes Winda in addition to a couple of more dark monsters. So a fully dark board is not out of the question. And also, this card has a really strong effect where if your opponent summons a monster from their extra deck while this card's on the field, this fusion summon card is on the field, you can negate that summon, which is, again, a pretty crazy thing to do, negate a summon. Now, it will stop inherent summons from the extra deck. I'm pretty sure it will not stop a summon coming off of a spell. It's just inherent summons. So it can't stop like a polymerization into a monster. It'll just stop like an XYZ monster coming out, but still very strong. Preda Plant, Dracus Depolia. This is another one that's really good against tier elements. It's good against just any deck that uses Phoenix Enforcer, Dragoon, any deck that ends on a fusion monster and a dark monster. Mostly this is really strong against tier elements, but this is also very easy to use in tier elements. So either way, it's good against the deck and it's good in the deck. This I put here just because it's good for searching. This card is good for searching Super Poly, but in addition to that, like I said, the end board of tier elements, it includes Preda Plant, Dracus Depolia almost every single time. And this requires just a Preda Plant monster and a dark monster. So if your opponent ends on this, you can Super Poly into this, and then next turn search an additional Super Polymerization, which is kind of crazy. Thunder Dragon Titan, if you happen to be playing against Thunder Dragons, you can catch them off guard with this sometimes. Next we've got the First of the Dragons, which fuses 2 normal monsters. So if you're in a situation where you're like in a mirror match with, for example, if you're in a mirror match with a deck that has, if you're in a mirror match with like an adventurer deck, you can actually Super Poly both your tokens away after you use your Griffin Rider, so that you ensure that they don't actually get to their Griffin Rider and they don't get to bounce your background, stuff like that. Just any 2 normal monsters. In addition to that, this card has a pretty crazy effect where this card can't be destroyed by battle by a monster that's not a normal monster. It's unaffected by other monster effects. So there are decks that don't really play like spell and trap card based destruction of other monsters. If they don't play that, it is literally impossible for them to out this card. You just leave it in defense mode. It's also good against all of the token generator decks, kind of like Sword Soul, because all normal monsters always count. I'm sorry, all tokens always count as normal monsters. So this card is actually really, really good against token generating decks. Next, we've got the Chimera Tech Over Dragons, the Cyber Dragon, and any machine monster, any number of machine monsters. You can get rid of an entire opponent's board if they're playing Cyber Dragons. This one's a little more niche, but I mean, if your friend is like playing Cyber Dragons, you need a way to win. This will do it. If Cyber Dragon suddenly becomes like a very meta-relevant strategy, it's pretty good. Yeah, it's generally like that. This is decent against pendulums. It's a dark monster and a pendulum monster. Its effects aren't like outrageously good, but it's a pretty decent way to get rid of a pendulum board. But there's so many different ways to actually wreck pendulums that you don't particularly need to play this one. There's a lot of other options like this one right here with the cook. There's no way I'm pronouncing that, but this card is also very good against pendulums, just because it's just 2 pendulum monsters, kind of crazy. Good for disrupting their board as they're setting it up, and it's also good for destroying their end board. Next, we've got one of the best starving venom. Just any 2 dark monsters on the field, can't be tokens, but any 2 dark monsters. Also very strong. And this one copies the attack of a monster your opponent controls, which makes it extremely, extremely powerful. This is another one. Basically, it's a starving venom, but it requires a dark fusion monster and a fusion monster. Again, pretty good against tier elements because, as you can see, most of their monsters are dark fusion monsters, so it's pretty easy to do this, and they end again on the Dracus Depolia, so you can use their dark fusion monster and another fusion monster. Like let's say they end on a Winda and a Dracus Depolia, you can fuse both of those away, and then you get this thing, and this thing when it leaves the field actually comes back for free. Or you can summon any, you can target any dark monster and then bring it back for free. If you've got Sea Monster Theseus, obviously Crystron Heckler Fireback still running around the meta. This is just any 2 tuners. Typically people will use this to combo off, but if your opponent does have multiple tuners on board, you can just fuse their tuners away, and now their plays are just totally dead. There's nothing that they can do. This is 2 Cyber Dragon monsters. Again, pretty generic, just any 2 Cyber Dragon monsters. Then we've got Mud Dragon of the Swamp. This was the runner-up of the best Super Poly target before that. The best Super Poly targets used to basically be these 2 right here. But now with Garuga coming out, obviously this card is a little odder because it's basically any monsters with the same attribute but different types. So this actually does come up. There are a lot of decks like this where let's say they'll be all dark, but in addition to being dark, they'll some of them will be fairy, some of them will be dragons, stuff like that. It's actually pretty good at breaking those boards. And sometimes random combinations of end boards will end on a variety of different monsters with the same attribute but different types. Dark is a very, very popular attribute, so it's actually very common to end on like an end board with like 3 dark monsters, like a Borlode Savage Dragon and like a Phoenix Enforcer, for example. They're both dark, but at the end of the day, both they're both dark monsters, but they have different types, so you can kind of like fuse them away. So generally, this is a pretty good one, and so is that one. Next, we've got the Brotherhood of the Firefist Swan. This is actually any 2 Beast Warrior monsters, which is actually kind of crazy. Yeah, this is actually kind of crazy. Any 2 Beast Warrior monsters, pretty good against, if they make a comeback, of course. This is pretty good against Tri Brigade, because it pretty much wrecks their board, or their board as they're trying to set up, because some of their best monsters are actually Beast Warriors. Also pretty good against, obviously, against Zodiacs. If they weren't so like neutered on the ban list, this would definitely be a better Super Poly target. The Borreload Furious Dragon is really strong against Dragon Link. It can wreck their board. You can get rid of their Hot Red Dragon, and you can get rid of their Borreload Savage Dragon just in one shot. And then this card pops. This card can target a monster you control and one your opponent controls and destroy them. So on top of getting rid of 2 of their monsters, you can destroy one of your monsters and your opponent's monster, and that's a quick effect, so you can use that every single turn. So really strong there. Eldritch, the Mad Golden Lord, is actually a Super Poly target against Eldritch that's actually good against Eldritch. So it's actually tough for Eldritch to get rid of this card, because it can't be destroyed by card effects. So once you summon this, the only, like, their main out to your cards is actually going to be Conquistador, but this actually prevents this can't be destroyed by Conquistador, because it can't be destroyed by card effects, and it's 3800 attack, meaning it's stronger than every single main deck Eldritch card. Even Eldritch the Golden Lord, if you summon it from the graveyard, comes out. If you summon it using its graveyard effect by returning it to the hand, special summoning onto the field, comes out at 3500 attack, and this is 38. Literally, it's almost impossible for them to out it unless they're playing something odd, like a and even if they are playing something odd, so unless they're playing like Ice Dragon's Prison, they still would have trouble outing this, because most likely you're not even playing a zombie deck. You're just playing this as a Super Poly target. So this is actually a card that's very good against Eldritch. Next, we've got Invoked Elysium. Any invoked monster and a monster special summon from the extra deck. Thank God it says special summon from the extra deck. So it could be an XYZ monster, anything. So it's pretty good against, obviously, if you see an invoked matchup, this card's pretty strong against them. Yep, and it banishes all monsters your opponent controls with the same attribute. Next, we've got dragonknightdraco Exquisite. Again, this is a dragon synchro monster, so like Borreload Savage Dragon, for example, and then a warrior monster. So this could be, like, for example, either a warrior monster could be like Baron de Fleur as a warrior. So if they have a Borreload Savage Dragon and a Baron de Fleur, this completely outs that. In addition to if they have like a Phoenix Enforcer and a Borreload Savage Dragon, again, this totally outs it. Next, we've got allmorereduct, which is any 3-link monsters. Again, if it just depends on the meta. The thing about Super Poly is it depends on the meta. I think it's going to be very good. I think this card is very niche, but I mean, if some deck springs out of nowhere that can summon 3-link monsters consistently, I would say give this a try. 2 zombies, obviously, Drago Necro. This card basically is very good with Zombie World. If you use Zombie World and you have this, it is just very strong, because you can just fuse anything you want as long as it's affected by spell cards. Also, Zombie World is just generally very good against certain decks. If you put this on the field and you go first against Splites, all of their Toad plays are totally dead. They literally cannot make a totally awesome play, because Toad requires 2 Aqua monsters. All their monsters in the field are zombies, so they literally cannot do it. And then, of course, you can just fuse away anything that's not a frog, so their plays just sort of die. Next, we've got Vision Hero Adoration. Any 2 hero monsters, just wrecks heroes, pretty much. Whatever their end board is, like, let's say it's Dark Law plus, usually it's like Dark Law and some combination of like Absolute Zero. If that's their end board, you just fuse them away, and then they can't even like cycle into the other water monster, because the one of them is no longer on board. 2 warriors with different attributes. This was very good against a Baron de Fleur and Phoenix Enforcer. Obviously, Phoenix Enforcer is not used as much because Preda Plant, Verde Anaconda's banned, but still, again, depending on the right warrior deck, it can be useful. Again, another card that's very good against heroes. These are both very, very good against heroes. And this actually negates a card that targets. So if your opponent activates like Imperm in the middle of your combo, you can negate the effect and then destroy an additional card on the field. So pretty good. You can like get rid of your opponent's hero monsters if they try to Imperm something. You pop something, and just very good against very good against warrior decks in general. We've got Earth Golem at Ignister, good against Cyberse decks. Cyberse decks that are in the game right now are like Salamangrates. This is great against. This is great against. Marincess, for example. It's very good against just any Cyber Code Talkers if you happen to play against them. Diplexer, Chimeras, and other 2 Cyberse monsters, pretty good against them. Prank Kids are a little bit dead in the metagame right now, but this can come up for sure. We've got one Panzer Dragon, which is 1 machine and 1 dragon. Again, like not like the greatest combo ever, but certain decks can end on this combination, so if you manage to see it, this can be a pretty good out. And then basically if this card's destroyed, you can pop a card. You've got 1 Spellcaster, 1 Dragon. This used to be really good against Dragoon, but Dragoon's basically gone now, so there isn't like a really good combination that this card is good against. But again, if the right deck comes up for a lot of these and you notice that your opponent's playing this, it can be pretty good against them. Next we've got Cordius, the Dealman. This is another one that's like extremely niche. 1 Synchro monster, 1 XYZ monster, 1 Link monster. It requires obviously a very, very diverse board to be on your opponent's side of the field, but occasionally some decks can manage to do this. So it can come up in handy. El Shaddoll Window is actually a Shaddoll monster and a dark monster. This is actually very good against tier elements too, because you can just fuse away. Like they will end on a Preda Plant Dracus Depolia, and they'll end on like one of their own monsters and then a window. But you could just fuse their window plus the Preda Plant, and then you can make your own window, and now you've locked them under a window, and you got rid of their board. So it's pretty useful there. And then of course we've got the Pastache, which is basically a super poly target for pendulum monsters. Pretty strong against them in general, but generally speaking, I like the Starving Venomy Dragon. But this is more generic, so if they use like a pendulum archetype that isn't a dark base, this is still good against it. Like that new one that's coming out with the water pendulum archetype, where they use like some of the magicians that aren't dark. This can actually come up against them. Not all, of course, not all pendulum archetypes are dark, so it does come up that you can sometimes use this more generically. And then there's also a Psychic Fusion monster that's pretty decent. I just remembered it live, which is the Ultimate Axon Kicker. This can actually come up sometimes, so this card is actually good against it. Just like right here came up against punks. This card is actually pretty decent against punks, because the Psychic Synchro monster and then a Psychic type monster, so you can use this to either interrupt them as they're making their board, or you can just use this against them in general. Also, punks are getting additional support, so that might actually make them even better of a pure deck, and this card actually just kind of like destroys punks in general. If they do try to play a pure, or if they try to make like an omega and then continue their punk line, this can actually be really strong in the deck against them. So that is the total, like that is all of the various super poly targets that are pretty good. If there's any that I missed, of course, list them in the comment section below, or if there are any that any cool uses that you find for these. Of course, super poly gets better if you play it against decks that are the less of an extra deck that you need, the better super poly is, because then you can play 15 straight super poly targets, and then you don't have to stress about, oh, this card's a little niche, because it doesn't matter if it's a little bit niche. Generally speaking, it's going to be overall pretty useful anyway. So overall, I think that the best ones are, of course, Garuga, Starving Venom, Mud Dragon, and then either the Preda Plant or one of the various Preda Plant monsters. You can choose the one, but these three are generally the best ones. And then of course we've got these three Preda Plants. The other ones just depend on which way the meta goes. So those are all of the super poly targets that I think are good. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff.